The swamp was supposed to be nothing more than a short detour, a place Marissa would pass through on her way back to the hunting cabin where her friends waited, laughing and sharing beer as the night grew colder. She had been confident when she set out with her rifle slung over her shoulder, thinking she would circle the marsh, cut across a narrow trail and return within the hour. But confidence has a cruel way of fading once the woods close in, and the sky turns strange. It happened gradually at first. The sun slipped lower, the mist began to rise, and the trees, thick with moss and roots, shifted into unfamiliar shapes. When she turned to retrace her steps, the trail had vanished, swallowed by mud and water. She paused, trying to breathe evenly, reminding herself that she was no beginner, that she had been in the wilderness dozens of times before. But the swamp was different. It had no landmarks, no steady ground, and every direction seemed the same. The air buzzed with insects, her boots grew heavy with mud, and the silence between frog calls stretched too long, like the land itself was listening. She pressed forward, telling herself she would recognize a bend or a tree soon, but with each step, her certainty drained. An hour passed then too. She tried to use the fading sun to orient herself, but clouds rolled in, erasing even that anchor. By the time she admitted she was lost, night had already crept across the water, and the swamp seemed to come alive with sounds she had never noticed before. Every splash in the dark made her grip her rifle tighter. Every ripple in the stagnant water seemed too large, too close. Her throat was dry, though water was everywhere, and the smell of rotting vegetation clung to her lungs. She told herself she had to stay calm. Panic, she knew, would be more dangerous than the gators or snakes she might stumble across. She found a small mound of earth, barely higher than the waterline, and sat there to think. 30 minutes turned into an hour as she tried to piece together where she might have gone wrong, but the truth pressed in harder than the mosquitoes. No one knew she had strayed this far. Her friends would assume she was simply taking longer, maybe that she had tracked something worth shooting. The thought made her stomach knot. If they didn't realize soon, she would be out here alone, with no way to signal them through the dense trees and endless miles of muck. She checked her phone, half hopeful, though she already knew the answer. No signal. Just the empty battery icon mocking her, a reminder of how quickly technology abandons you in places that feel older than time itself. She shut it off to conserve power, even though it felt useless, and tried to listen for anything human. A voice, a motor, a crack of a branch that wasn't her own. Nothing came. The night deepened, and the swamp became a place of shadows and whispers. She could hear movement in the water, slow and deliberate, and the hair on her arms rose. She gripped her rifle not for hunting anymore but for comfort. The weight of it steadied her, though she wondered if even a bullet could protect her from everything lurking in the dark. She forced herself to close her eyes for a while, though sleep never fully came. Each time her head dipped, a splash or a rustle snapped her back awake. The hours dragged like days, and hunger began to gnaw at her gut, a reminder she had only packed light. She chewed a piece of jerky, sipped sparingly from her water bottle, and tried to believe that dawn would bring clarity. But dawn only revealed more swamp, more green-gray stretches of water and tangled roots, and the sinking realization that she was deeper in than before. Her boots were soaked, her legs scratched raw from thorns, and still she walked, telling herself she just had to keep moving until something changed. Yet the swamp had its own rules, and it did not care about her determination. It twisted every path back onto itself, every channel into another, and before long she wondered if she had been walking in circles all along. Still, she pushed forward, clinging to the belief that giving up meant dying here. She told herself she could last. A day, maybe two. Surely someone would notice her absence, would come looking, would hear a shot if she fired. But then came the darker thought, what if they didn't? What if 32 hours stretched into forever? By the time the second night fell, Marissa's body had begun to betray her. Her legs ached with every step, and blisters had formed beneath her damp socks. The swamp gave no mercy. Every patch of ground that seemed firm collapsed into sucking mud, every fallen log was slick with moss that threatened to send her tumbling into the black water. She forced herself to keep her rifle above her shoulder, unwilling to let it slip from her grip, because it was the only thing that still gave her the illusion of control. Hunger had grown sharper, twisting in her stomach like a knife, and the small strips of jerky she had rationed were nearly gone. She drank the last of her clean water in tiny sips, watching the bottle empty as if it were her lifeline draining away. She thought about refilling it from the swamp, but even in her desperation she knew better. The water carried disease, bacteria, maybe worse. One mouthful could weaken her beyond recovery, and weakness out here was the same as death. Still, thirst made the thought more tempting with each passing hour. She tried to distract herself by thinking of her friends at the cabin. Maybe by now they had realized she was missing. Maybe someone had already driven out to get help, and there could be men with dogs and flashlights searching these waters. That hope flickered like a match in her mind, but it couldn't erase the fear that they might simply think she had chosen to camp out on her own. She had always been stubborn after all, and they would assume she knew how to handle herself. No one would suspect that the swamp had swallowed her. The loneliness pressed in heavier than the hunger or thirst. Every time she stopped moving, the silence seemed unbearable, filled only with the drone of insects and the occasional distant splash. She would imagine figures in the distance or hear faint voices, only to realize it was the wind pushing through the reeds. She shouted once, a desperate scream into the endless green, but the sound came back to her broken and hollow. No answer. Just the swamp. Fatigue blurred her thoughts, but instincts kept her moving. She told herself if she found higher ground, maybe she could climb a tree and see something. A road, a light, any sign of civilization. Hours later she stumbled onto a small ridge, no more than a hump of dirt with twisted roots clutching at it. She scrambled up, nails scraping bark, until she reached the thick branch of a cypress. Pulling herself higher, she finally rose above the endless canopy. The view crushed her hope rather than fed it. There was nothing but swamp in every direction, a vast choking sea of trees, water, and fog stretching to the horizon. No cabins, no lights, no roads. Just wilderness. The sight nearly broke her and she clung to the tree, fighting back tears. Crying would waste energy, waste water, she reminded herself, but the despair was too heavy. She felt like a ghost, already lost to the world, forgotten even before her body gave out. When she climbed back down, her hands were shaking. The night came colder than the first, a damp chill that clung to her soaked clothes and turned her bones stiff. She huddled against the roots, wrapping her arms around herself, listening to the night creatures stir. Somewhere nearby, something large splashed through the water, slow and heavy. She froze, breath caught in her throat, finger tightening on the trigger of her rifle. The sound passed, but it left her trembling. She knew predators lived here, gators, snakes, maybe even the wild hogs that could tear through a person if cornered. Every shadow seemed alive, every ripple a threat. Her stomach growled so loudly she almost laughed, though the sound came out as a hoarse cough. She had nothing left to eat now, and her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth with thirst. The swamp pressed her into desperation, forcing her to weigh the risk of drinking its water. She stared at the dark surface of a nearby pool, insects skating across it, and thought of death, whether it would come faster from dehydration or sickness. She dipped her bottle once, raised it to her lips, but stopped, shaking her head furiously. Not yet. Not unless she had no other choice. She needed another plan. She thought again of firing her rifle, a single shot into the night, a signal someone might hear. But the fear gnawed at her. What if no one came? What if the only thing the shot brought was attention from the wrong creature, dragging her deeper into the nightmare? She lowered the rifle and clenched her jaw, trying to summon patience, trying to believe in rescue. Still, the thought of that shot lingered in her mind like a card waiting to be played, a last desperate move when all else failed. The hours crept by until the first gray of dawn touched the mist. She was still alive, though weaker, colder, and hungrier than ever, and she knew the swamp had no intention of letting her go easily. 32 hours had not yet passed, but already every moment felt like an eternity carved into her skin. And somewhere deep inside, she began to sense that the rifle in her hands was not just a weapon anymore. It was a choice. And when the moment came, it would change everything. Morning brought no comfort, only a pale gray light that revealed just how far the swamp had claimed her. Marissa's clothes clung to her like a second skin, damp and heavy, her hair matted with sweat and swamp water. Every step was a fight against exhaustion. She pushed through the tall reeds, the rifle digging into her shoulder, her throat raw from thirst. The air smelled thick with decay and each breath carried the taste of rot. She thought about home, about the clean kitchen where she had poured coffee only 2 mornings ago, never imagining how precious a simple glass of water could be. The memory seemed unreal, as if it belonged to someone else. Her world now was mud, water, and endless buzzing insects that fed on her without mercy. Her arms were streaked with bites, red and swollen, and she scratched until her skin bled. She stopped when dizziness swam in her vision, leaning on a tree trunk for balance. She whispered to herself, trying to keep her mind anchored. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Her voice sounded alien in the silence. At times she swore she could hear something following her, the faint splash of water that wasn't hers, the creak of branches bending. She would spin, rifle ready, only to face emptiness. Still, the sensation of being watched never left. The swamp wasn't just indifferent, it was predatory, waiting for her to falter. She stumbled across a patch of higher ground, a rare rise of dry soil dotted with ferns, and there she sank to her knees. Her body screamed for rest, but her instincts warned against staying still too long. Predators hunted where prey lingered. She forced herself to stand again, though her legs shook, and she trudged onward, deeper still. Noon came without relief. The sun, hidden behind the clouds, turned the swamp into a suffocating oven. Her lips cracked and her tongue swelled against her teeth. Finally, desperation broke her restraint. She crouched by a pool, dipped her bottle, and stared at the murky liquid. She hesitated, thinking of sickness, but her body won the argument. She took a sip, gagged at the taste, and forced herself to swallow. It was filthy, bitter, and alive with things she couldn't see, but it was wet, and for a moment that was all that mattered. The guilt of it weighed on her almost as much as the fear. If the water poisoned her, it would only make the end come faster, but without it she was certain she wouldn't last the day. She walked again, slower now, her steps heavy and uneven. The swamp seemed endless, a maze with no exit, and she wondered if she had already crossed the same path dozens of times without realizing. Every tree looked like the last, every pool mirrored the one before. Time lost all meaning. It was as if the swamp itself was bending it, stretching every hour into a lifetime. Her thoughts turned darker with the fatigue. She began to wonder if this was how people simply disappeared, swallowed whole by nature, their names never carved on headstones because no body was ever found. She pictured her friends back at the cabin, maybe finally worrying, maybe already searching, but what if they looked in the wrong direction? What if they never came this way at all? The idea of being forgotten gnawed at her, and for the first time since she'd gotten lost, tears spilled down her cheeks. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, furious at herself for wasting the moisture, but the sobs still shook her chest. She screamed again, this time louder, a raw cry that ripped her throat, and the sound echoed across the swamp until it dissolved into silence. No reply. Just her own voice thrown back like a cruel trick. She dropped to the ground, curling against a tree root, and for a moment she wanted to give in. To close her eyes and let the swamp take her. But then she felt the hard weight of the rifle across her lap, a reminder of the choice she had left. A shot would carry farther than a scream. A shot could mean rescue. Or it could mean death, drawing predators closer. She stared at the barrel, her mind spinning. 32 hours had nearly passed. Her body couldn't keep going like this, not much longer. She thought of her father, teaching her to shoot when she was just a girl, telling her that a rifle was more than a weapon. It was a tool, sometimes even a voice. Maybe now it was the only voice she had left. She gripped it tight, lifting it slowly, weighing the silence of the swamp against the echo she could create. Somewhere deep inside she knew the decision was coming. She just didn't know yet what the shot would bring when she finally pulled the trigger. Marissa's body felt like it was moving on borrowed time as dusk bled into the swamp again, painting the water black and pulling shadows across every tree. Her legs wobbled with each step, her chest heaved like a bellows, and her mind drifted in and out of strange thoughts, fragments of memory mixing with hallucination. She imagined her friends sitting around the fire at the cabin, laughing, telling stories, oblivious to the fact that she was stumbling deeper into a place where laughter did not exist. She blinked hard, trying to stay focused, but the line between dream and reality had begun to blur. She stopped at the edge of another dark pool, staring into the water where her reflection wavered. It looked pale, hollow-eyed, streaked with grime and blood from mosquito bites, nothing like the strong, confident woman who had entered the swamp 32 hours earlier. She barely recognized herself. Her lips cracked when she tried to smile at the reflection, a feeble attempt to hold on to some shred of sanity, but the face staring back did not smile. It just trembled and dissolved into ripples when she touched the surface. The hunger had twisted into a dull ache now, but the thirst was a living beast, gnawing at her throat, pounding behind her temples. She drank again from the bottle, swamp water this time, swallowing against her body's protests. The bitterness coated her tongue and she forced herself not to gag. She told herself she had to keep moving, keep trying, but the swamp seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to mock her effort. Each step only led her deeper, each sound only reminded her of how utterly alone she was. Then came the noise, faint at first, a crack like a branch breaking in the distance. She froze, her heart hammering, rifle snapping to her shoulder. She held her breath and listened. Another crack closer. The swamp went still as if holding its own breath. Marissa's hands shook, sweat dripping into her eyes as she squinted into the dark. A shape moved between the trees, low, heavy, deliberate. Her body screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go, only water and mud in every direction. She steadied the rifle, the stock pressing into her shoulder, her finger tightening on the trigger. The shape came closer, splashing through the shallows, and a glint of eyes reflected the faint light. Alligator. She knew it instantly, the wide head, the rolling movement, the sheer size of it cutting across the water. Panic jolted through her veins. If she stayed still, maybe it would pass, but her scent, her movement, might already have drawn it in. The gator paused, its eyes fixed on her, and time slowed to a crawl. Her chest burned with the need to breathe, her muscles locked with fear. She could hear her father's voice in her mind again. A rifle is more than a weapon. It's a tool. Use it when the time is right. She swallowed, finger trembling against the trigger, and in that moment she understood the choice. She could risk everything on this single act, this single sound, and whatever followed would be beyond her control. The gator shifted, tail lashing water, and instinct overpowered hesitation. She pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, the shot shattering the swamp's silence like lightning splitting the sky. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, the sound echoing across the water in rolling waves. The gator jerked, thrashing, the bullet striking near its head, not a kill but enough to send it thrashing back into the depths with a roar of water. Marissa staggered, ears ringing, chest heaving, staring at the ripples spreading wide. The swamp came alive in response. Birds exploding from the trees, wings beating frantically, frogs silenced, insects buzzing louder. The sound carried, she knew it did, farther than any scream could. She lowered the rifle slowly, her body trembling from head to toe, and for the first time in hours she felt something stir in her chest. Hope. Someone had to have heard it. Someone had to be close enough to catch that echo and wonder what it meant. She sank to her knees on the muddy bank, gripping the rifle like a lifeline, tears blurring her vision. The shot had saved her from the gator, but more than that, it had broken the silence, shattered the isolation, announced to the world, or whatever part of it was listening, that she was still alive. She whispered it to herself over and over like a prayer. Still alive. Still alive. And now, all she could do was wait, heart pounding, ears straining, hoping that the echo of that single bullet would carry far enough to bring her salvation. The swamp fell silent after the echo of the shot faded, leaving only the pounding of Marissa's heart and the ringing in her ears. She crouched low, the rifle clutched tight, scanning the darkness for movement. The gator was gone, but the memory of its eyes lingered in her mind, glowing like two embers in the black water. She tried to steady her breath, tried to focus, but every sound seemed sharper now, every splash a threat. Her muscles ached from the tension, her hands numb from gripping the rifle so hard. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer, and then she heard something new, faint, distant, not the natural rhythm of the swamp. A voice. She froze, straining to listen. It was muffled, warped by the water and trees, but it was human, a shout, sharp and uncertain, cutting through the night air. Her chest tightened with hope and fear all at once. Had they heard her shot? She stood, wobbling, and cupped her hands to her mouth. Her throat burned, but she screamed anyway, pouring every ounce of strength she had left into the cry. Help. I'm here. The sound cracked, weak, but it carried. She waited, trembling. For a long moment there was nothing. Then another shout answered, faint but closer this time. Relief crashed over her, so overwhelming it nearly brought her to her knees. Someone was out there, searching. She shouted again, louder, desperate, until her voice broke. The swamp answered with silence for several minutes that felt like an eternity. Her heart raced with dread. What if she had imagined it? Hallucinations had been clawing at her mind since exhaustion set in. But then she heard it again, the sound of men's voices, clearer now, echoing across the water. She could almost make out words. A sob tore from her chest, and she screamed once more, her voice raw but filled with every ounce of survival left in her. Here. This way. The swamp stirred as she shouted. Birds took flight, wings beating in alarm, and ripples spread across the water. She didn't care. She shouted again and again until her throat felt torn apart. Then, between the trees, a faint glimmer of light appeared. She blinked, certain it was another trick, but it grew stronger, flickering, moving steadily closer. A flashlight. Her body sagged with relief, but fear still lingered. What if it wasn't her friends? What if hunters or strangers or worse had heard her shot? She raised the rifle again just in case, her hands trembling too badly to hold it steady. The voices drew closer, the light sweeping across the trees. Then she heard her name. Clear. Familiar. Marissa. The sound cracked her open. She sobbed, collapsing to her knees in the mud, clutching the rifle against her chest as tears poured down her face. Here. "I'm here," she screamed. The flashlight beam swung toward her, catching her in its glow, and moments later 2 figures splashed through the water, rushing toward her. She recognized them even through her blurred vision. 2 of her friends from the cabin, their faces pale with shock and relief. One dropped to her side, pulling her into a muddy embrace, while the other shone the light across her body, checking for injuries. She could barely form words through the sobs. I thought I was gone," her friend hushed her, squeezing her shoulders. "You're okay now. We've got you." More voices called from the distance, other searchers moving in, their lights cutting through the swamp like stars brought down to earth. For the first time in 32 hours, Marissa felt the weight of the swamp lift slightly, replaced by the warmth of human presence. She wasn't alone anymore. Still, her body fought to shut down, exhaustion pulling her toward unconsciousness. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out and her friends caught her, holding her upright. "We need to get her back," one said, urgency in his tone. "She's dehydrated, weak. She can't walk on her own." Marissa wanted to protest, wanted to say she was fine, but her voice failed her. She let them hold her, let them half carry her through the water as other beams of light joined theirs. The swamp looked different now, less endless, less suffocating, though it was the same place. The difference was simple: she was no longer fighting it alone. She clutched the rifle against her chest, the same rifle that had terrified her, steadied her, and finally saved her. That single shot had been the thread between life and death, silence and salvation. As her friends guided her toward safety, she realized just how thin that thread had been, and how close she had come to being swallowed forever by the swamp. Marissa drifted in and out of awareness as her friends guided her through the swamp, their arms supporting her weak body as if she were little more than a rag doll. Her boots dragged through the mud, her head lolled against one shoulder, but she refused to let go of the rifle clutched tight to her chest. Every step hurt, every breath scraped her throat, yet she kept her eyes open, afraid that if she closed them she might not wake again. The lights of the other searchers bobbed through the trees, cutting streaks of yellow across the black water, and their voices wove together like a lifeline pulling her back to the world she thought she had lost. They moved slowly, carefully, retracing paths they had marked with ribbons of cloth tied to branches. At last they reached the edge of the swamp where the ground began to rise, firmer underfoot. Marissa collapsed onto the dirt, the feel of solid earth beneath her almost bringing her to tears. She lay there while her friends knelt beside her, offering water from a clean bottle and checking her pulse. She drank greedily, the cool liquid rushing down her throat like salvation, though it hurt going down after so much raw thirst. One of them broke a granola bar in half and pressed it into her hand. She chewed slowly, each bite heavy, her stomach twisting with both hunger and pain after being empty for so long. The sweetness nearly overwhelmed her. Around them, more searchers arrived, some local volunteers, others from the nearby town, all drawn by the report of a missing hiker. They spoke in low voices, exchanging relief and disbelief that she had survived 32 hours in the swamp. Marissa listened in silence, unable to find the strength to answer. Her mind kept replaying the moment of the shot, the crack that shattered the silence, the way the swamp itself had seemed to stop breathing when the bullet tore through it. She realized how close she had been to giving up, how that one decision had changed everything. A truck was waiting at the trailhead, headlights cutting through the mist, and they lifted her into the back seat. The warmth of the cab wrapped around her, and for the first time since entering the swamp, she felt safe. As the engine rumbled to life, she sagged against the seat, closing her eyes, though the images of the swamp clung to her. The gator's eyes, the endless water, the sound of her own voice swallowed by the dark. At the cabin, others rushed out to meet them, their faces pale with guilt and relief. Some had tears in their eyes, muttering apologies that they hadn't realized sooner, hadn't come searching faster. Marissa shook her head weakly. "I'm here," she whispered, the words rough, torn from her throat, but they were enough. They carried her inside, set her by the fire, wrapped her in blankets, and forced her to sip more water, nibble more food. She trembled violently as her body tried to warm itself, her teeth chattering, but the heat of the flames and the closeness of her friends slowly brought her back. Hours passed like moments, and though she drifted between wakefulness and sleep, she could feel the difference now. She was no longer alone. She caught fragments of their voices as they spoke around her, saying things like, "She should have been dead out there," and "That shot saved her." The words barely sank in, but one thought pulsed steady in her mind. She had faced the swamp and somehow she had come back. By the time dawn rose again, soft light spilling through the cabin window, Marissa sat propped in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the fire. She felt hollow, her body bruised and battered, but alive. Her friends hovered nearby, bringing her coffee, fussing over her, but she barely spoke. She was still listening to the swamp inside her head, to the silence between sounds, to the memory of what it meant to stand alone against a world that wanted to erase her. 32 hours had carved themselves into her soul. And though she was safe now, she knew the swamp had marked her forever. The swamp had become a living nightmare, but somewhere deep inside her, Emily knew she was closer to the end of her ordeal than ever before. The hours had blurred into one another, 32 long, punishing hours of mud, hunger, and unrelenting fear. Yet with each trembling breath, she felt something shift inside her. The swamp had stripped her down, tested her resolve, and forced her to face the raw edge of survival. She had not broken. She was still standing, or at least crawling, stumbling, dragging herself forward. The gun in her hands was not just a weapon anymore, it was a piece of hope, the only tool she had to carve a path out of this hell. As the late afternoon light slanted through the twisted cypress branches, Emily noticed how the swamp itself seemed quieter now. The croaking frogs and buzzing insects had faded into a hushed stillness, and that silence unnerved her more than the noise ever had. It felt as though the swamp was holding its breath, waiting for the climax of her struggle. Every step she took squelched in the muck, loud against the eerie calm. Then through the trees she caught sight of something she hadn't seen in over a day: smoke. A thin column of gray rising above the treetops, too deliberate to be natural, too steady to belong to the swamp itself. Her pulse quickened. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. For the first time since she had been left behind, she dared to imagine rescue was near. But the smoke was far, and the swamp would not let her reach it easily. She pushed forward, the swamp clutching at her legs like a jealous captor. The mud was thicker here, a sucking quagmire that tried to swallow her boots with every step. She gritted her teeth, clutching the rifle to her chest, and forced her body through the resistance. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't allow herself to stop. She could not afford hesitation, not when hope was so close. Hours ago she might have surrendered to the fatigue, but now her mind was sharpened by the knowledge that someone out there was alive, and if she could find them she might survive this nightmare. Yet she wasn't naive. In the swamp, not all people meant safety. She remembered the distant gunshot she had heard earlier, the unnatural silence that had followed. She remembered the shadowy shapes in the trees the night before, the feeling that she was being stalked. The smoke might lead her to safety, or to something far worse. She had to be ready for either. Her instincts told her to move carefully. She crouched low, crawling through patches of tall grass, keeping her profile small against the horizon. The swamp seemed to stretch forever, but gradually the smoke grew thicker, closer, until she could smell the faint scent of burning wood. Her heart pounded. She slowed her breathing, steadying her grip on the rifle. The world had taught her in 32 hours that survival belonged to those who anticipated danger, not those who rushed blindly into it. She reached a ridge of moss-covered roots and pulled herself up, peering through the curtain of vines. What she saw on the other side froze her blood. There was a camp in the swamp clearing, rough and makeshift but occupied. Two figures moved around a fire pit, their voices carrying in the still air. One was sharpening a blade on a whetstone, the other loading a magazine into a pistol. These were not rescuers. They were hunters. Emily's stomach dropped as realization hit her. They were the ones she had felt trailing her, the predators circling her in the darkness. And now she had stumbled into their den. For a long, breathless moment she didn't move. The swamp around her pressed in, thick with tension, her heart hammering so loudly she feared they might hear it. She had one choice now: retreat quietly and risk being tracked again, or confront the danger head-on with the single bullet she had left. She tightened her grip on the rifle, her finger brushing against the cold steel of the trigger. Her mind raced through the possibilities. If she retreated, she might buy herself a few more hours, but they would eventually find her. They knew this swamp better than she did. They had the weapons, the strength, the advantage. If she stayed, she might end it here on her terms with one decisive shot. She thought about the smoke rising above the trees, the signal that had lured her closer. It wasn't hope, it was bait, a lure to draw the desperate and lost straight into the jaws of predators. They hadn't expected her to make it this far, but she had. And now she had to decide if she would continue to run or if she would turn and fight. Slowly, she lifted the rifle to her shoulder, her breathing steady despite the storm raging inside her. The swamp had tested her courage, stripped away her fear, and left her with a simple truth: survival was not about waiting for rescue. It was about taking control no matter the cost. She centered her aim on the man with the pistol, the firelight gleaming on his weapon. Her finger rested on the trigger, and for a moment the world held still. The swamp was silent, the hunters unaware, and Emily knew that everything, her suffering, her fear, her 32 hours of torment, had led to this single instant. The final confrontation between Ayan and Samir was inevitable, and both of them knew it. The tension that had been building for months reached its breaking point one evening when Ayan returned home to find Samir waiting outside his apartment, leaning casually against the wall as if he owned the place. His eyes glimmered with arrogance, but there was also a flicker of desperation, the kind that belongs to someone who senses they are about to lose everything. Ayan's fists tightened at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm, to control the storm raging within him. Samir smirked and said in a low voice, "So, the hero finally arrives. Tell me, Ayan, how does it feel to steal what doesn't belong to you?" Ayan's jaw clenched, his voice steady but cold. "Love isn't something you steal, Samir. It's given freely and she never gave hers to you. You've been living in a lie and now it's time you face the truth." Samir's face darkened, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think you're better than me? That because she chose you, you've won? You don't know what I've sacrificed. I built my life for her, and I won't let you take her away." His words were sharp, dripping with bitterness, but Ayan only took a step closer, his presence unshakable. "You never built a life for her, you built a cage. That's why she left you. That's why she'll never return. Because with you she couldn't breathe. With me she's free, and that's something you'll never understand." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, charged with years of rivalry, jealousy, and suppressed rage. Samir suddenly lunged forward, his hand reaching for Ayan's collar, but Ayan blocked him swiftly, his reflexes honed not by violence but by the discipline he had cultivated through patience. He shoved Samir back firmly, not with hatred but with the force of someone defending his truth. Samir stumbled, his pride more wounded than his body, and he shouted, "You'll regret this. I swear I'll destroy everything you've built together." Ayan's eyes burned with determination. "No, Samir. The only thing you'll destroy is yourself. Because hate always consumes the one who carries it. I don't hate you. But I won't let you hurt her, or us, again." Samir froze, caught off guard by the unexpected weight of those words. He had prepared himself for a fight, for a violent clash that would give him an excuse to unleash the darkness he carried. Instead, he was faced with something far more disarming, the power of a man who had nothing to prove, because he had already won the only battle that mattered, the battle for her heart. Samir's chest rose and fell rapidly as his breathing grew uneven. The truth of Ayan's words sank into him, corroding the last fragments of denial he clung to. He realized, with a bitterness that felt like poison in his veins, that no matter what he did, he could never win her back. She had chosen Ayan not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of love. And that love was something he could never force or replicate. Slowly, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dulling as the fire in them dimmed. He looked away, unable to meet Ayan's gaze any longer. "You'll regret this kindness," he muttered weakly, though his voice had lost its venom. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy, dragging as though the weight of his own defeat pressed down on him. Ayan watched him disappear into the distance, his heart heavy not with triumph but with empathy. He knew that Samir's downfall was not just losing a woman, it was losing himself in the shadows of obsession and pride. Ayan returned home, and when she saw him, her eyes filled with both relief and love. She asked nothing about what happened because she already knew. Instead, she embraced him, and in that embrace all doubts melted away. Their love had survived the trials, the storms, and the venom of envy. It had not only survived but emerged stronger, forged in fire and unbreakable in spirit. That night, as they sat together in the quiet glow of their home, Ayan realized something profound. Life is not about defeating others, but about conquering the fears and weaknesses within ourselves. Love is not about possession but about freedom, the freedom to be fully oneself and the courage to let another do the same. Samir's shadow would always linger somewhere in the distance, but it no longer had power over them. Their story was no longer about rivalry or revenge. It was about healing, growth, and the simple, unshakable truth that love given freely is the strongest force in the world. As the stars shone outside the window, Ayan held her hand, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them in the future, they would face them side by side. Together they had written a story that no one, not even Samir, could ever erase. The end.